Chapter 1. Introduction. In the opening chapter of Delay, Deny, Defend, J.M. Feinman introduces readers to the core thesis of his book, which is the systemic exploitation of policyholders by the insurance industry. He explains that, over time, the insurance sector, which was originally founded to help individuals protect themselves from financial risks, has evolved into a profit-driven industry. Insurers now prioritize minimizing payouts and maximizing their own profit margins, often at the expense of the very people they are supposed to protect. Feinman identifies a pattern within the industry where insurers deliberately engage in tactics such as delaying claims, denying valid claims, and defending against lawsuits with the sole purpose of minimizing their obligations. Through the book, Feinman seeks to expose how these practices are systematically woven into the culture of the insurance industry and how they negatively affect consumers. Feinman makes it clear that this book is not just a critique of individual bad actors, but a deeper look at the institutionalized practices that have been adopted across the industry. Insurance companies are using their immense power and resources to frustrate and defeat claims, exploiting the lack of consumer knowledge and the asymmetry of power between the insurer and the policyholder. Chapter 2. The History of Insurance. This chapter provides the reader with a historical perspective on the insurance industry. Initially, insurance was designed to help people protect their property and loved ones by pooling resources to mitigate risk. Over time, the industry evolved from a mutual aid system where people came together to protect each other to a more complex and corporate-driven system. In its early days, insurance was operated largely by mutual companies that were owned by their policyholders, creating a structure where the interests of the customer were closely aligned with the business practices of the company. As the industry grew, however, a shift occurred. Large for-profit companies began to dominate the market, and the primary goal of insurance became to maximize profits for shareholders. These companies started treating policyholders less like members of a mutual organization and more like customers, whose claims were seen as potential costs to minimize. The rise of large corporate insurers also marked the beginning of aggressive marketing, the development of complex policies, and the creation of claims processes that increasingly favored the insurers. This chapter highlights how these shifts led to the adoption of practices that focus more on increasing profits than serving the public good. Chapter 3. Delay Tactics. The third chapter focuses on one of the most insidious tactics used by insurance companies: delay. Feinman explains that insurance companies intentionally delay the claims process as a strategy to reduce payouts. The longer a claim is delayed, the less likely it is that a policyholder will be able to follow through, especially if they are facing financial hardship as a result of the claim. This chapter explores how delays in processing claims can be used as a tool to wear down consumers, forcing them to accept settlements that are far less than what they are entitled to or to abandon their claims entirely. Feinman discusses how insurers will request additional documentation, require repeated investigations, or even misplace paperwork as part of their delay tactics. He also notes that delays can have serious financial and emotional consequences for claimants, particularly in cases where individuals are relying on the insurance payout to cover life-changing events like property damage, health issues, or accidents. By stretching out the claims process, insurance companies hope that claimants will eventually become discouraged or financially desperate enough to accept much lower settlements. Chapter 4. Denying Claims. Feinman dedicates an entire chapter to the practice of denying claims, which is another powerful tool in the insurance industry's strategy to protect its profits. This tactic involves rejecting claims that are valid or providing reasons to invalidate the claims of policyholders. Feinman explains that denial often occurs because of vague or confusing language in insurance policies, which allows insurers to exploit technicalities to avoid paying claims. Many policyholders are left in the dark about their rights and the terms of their policies, and the insurer often uses this to their advantage. For instance, Insurance companies may argue that certain damages were caused by exclusions in the policy or that a claimant failed to follow specific instructions that were buried in the fine print. Feinman points out that these denials are often a result of deliberate strategies, where insurance companies rely on their legal teams to aggressively pursue denials, hoping that most claimants will not have the resources or knowledge to contest the decision. He offers examples of people who have been denied coverage for serious events like accidents or property damage that were clearly covered under their policies, showing how this tactic is used not only to save money, but to create an environment where policyholders are reluctant to pursue their claims further. Chapter 5. Defending against claims. When a policyholder chooses to fight back after a delay or denial, insurance companies often turn to their most powerful tactic, defending against claims. This chapter explores the legal strategies insurers use to drag out litigation or force claimants into difficult legal battles. Feinman discusses the vast resources insurance companies have at their disposal, including large teams of lawyers, investigators, and legal experts, which they use to make defending a claim a long and exhausting process for the individual claimant. Feinman explains that the defense process often involves filing motions to dismiss or complicating the legal process with procedural hurdles, making it harder for the average consumer to navigate. This chapter also emphasizes the psychological toll of such defense tactics, as claimants are often left feeling powerless and overwhelmed. The sheer scale and complexity of defending against an insurer's legal team can deter policyholders from pursuing legitimate claims, forcing them into a position where they must settle for far less than they deserve or drop the case entirely. Chapter 6. Profits over people. In Chapter 6, Feinman delves into the fundamental issue of the insurance industry's focus on profits at the expense of its customers. He highlights that most modern insurance companies are publicly traded, meaning they must answer to shareholders and focus on increasing stock prices and dividend payouts. This profit-driven model creates a situation where the interests of the policyholders are often ignored in favor of reducing costs, including denying or delaying claims. Feinman argues that this focus on profits leads to unethical business practices, as companies actively work to avoid paying out claims by exploiting the fine print, using delay tactics, and denying claims outright. He also points out that executive compensation is often tied to the company's profitability, which further incentivizes them to minimize claims payouts. This chapter serves as a critique of the current corporate structure of the insurance industry, and Feinman calls for a reevaluation of how the industry operates, suggesting that a shift towards a more customer-centric approach would be necessary to restore fairness and accountability. Chapter 7. The Impact on Consumers. Chapter 7 brings a human perspective to the book, focusing on the consequences of the delay, deny, and defend tactics for ordinary consumers. Feinman explores how these tactics contribute to financial hardship, emotional distress, and a general lack of trust in the insurance industry. He shares stories of real people who have been adversely affected by the insurance industry's tactics, often leaving them without the financial support they need in critical moments. The chapter outlines how policyholders who have paid premiums for years may find themselves denied when it's time to make a claim. The stress of dealing with these tactics can cause people to accept settlements far below their rightful compensation or abandon their claims altogether. Feinman emphasizes that the people who are most vulnerable to these practices are often those who can least afford to fight back, such as low-income individuals or the elderly. Chapter 8. Regulatory Failures. Feinman critiques the regulatory framework that allows these insurance practices to continue unchecked. He explains that state regulators, whose job is to protect consumers, often lack the resources or political will to enforce fair practices in the insurance industry. He discusses how political contributions from large insurers influence regulatory bodies, making it difficult for policyholders to rely on government oversight to protect them. Additionally, Feinman highlights the lack of real penalties for insurers who engage in bad faith practices, creating an environment where companies can act with impunity. He argues that stronger enforcement mechanisms and more rigorous oversight are needed to hold insurance companies accountable and ensure that they serve the interests of policyholders rather than shareholders. Chapter 9. Reforming the System. In this chapter, Feinman offers several suggestions for reforming the insurance industry to ensure fairer treatment for consumers. He advocates for the implementation of stronger consumer protection laws, including clearer policy language, faster claims processing, and better oversight of insurance practices. Feinman also suggests that policymakers should push for changes that would reduce the power imbalance between insurers and policyholders, ensuring that consumers have the tools they need to challenge unfair claims practices. Feinman further argues that increasing transparency in the insurance claims process would empower consumers and reduce the potential for manipulation by insurers. He proposes that the insurance industry move towards a more cooperative model where the interests of the policyholder are prioritized alongside the company's profit goals. Chapter 10. Empowering Consumers. The final chapter of Delay, Deny, Defend focuses on empowering consumers to take action when they encounter unfair insurance practices. Feinman provides practical advice on how to protect oneself when dealing with insurance companies, including how to read and understand policies, what to do when a claim is delayed or denied, and how to seek legal assistance if necessary. He encourages readers to be proactive in their dealings with insurers, keeping detailed records and challenging unfair practices. Feinman also calls on consumers to advocate for systemic change, working with advocacy groups, legislators, and other stakeholders to push for reforms that would protect individuals from bad faith insurance practices. By understanding their rights and taking action, Feinman believes consumers can hold the insurance industry accountable and ensure that insurance serves its original purpose of providing protection and security.